3 months to this truly important roundtable update on representation in the staffing industry. If you would use the chat to announce that you're online, we look forward. We will be starting within the next 5 minutes. So we welcome all of you to the Women's Business Collaborative Forum on the staffing industry. And please announce yourself in the chat as we talk about this critical subject for jobs and staffing. Welcome as you sign in on the chat. We welcome you to this critical roundtable on the increasing our representation in the staffing industry. Just announce yourself in the chat. All comments and questions, feel free to use the chat. Welcome to everyone signing in the staffing industry. No more important time for this discussion on leadership and staffing. Please announce yourself in the chat. Again, welcome to the staffing industry presentation. And please announce yourself in the chat. Any comments, questions, please feel free to use the chat. And we'll be starting within 3 minutes. Thank you all for joining us today. Continue to register in the chat. Welcome to everyone. Starting in the next 2 minutes. A warm welcome to everyone joining the call. Please register in the chat and provide any comments. A warm welcome. Welcome to the subject of diverse leadership, of increasing the representation in the staffing industry. I'm Edie Fraser, CEO of Women's Business Collaborative, and it is our honor to work in partnership with the staffing industry, together with two leaders, Kip Wright and Barb Bruno, as they champion with so many others and with ASA, SIA, TechServe, and NAPS, as we join together in total collaboration to focus on jobs. And as the new jobs report came out this morning, and as jobs are the #1 economic indicator of economic prosperity for this country, we know the role the staffing industry plays in over 10 million jobs a year, and the importance of getting gender parity and diversity right. And with that, during Women's History Month, we say, what a great time to kick off this discussion. Can we all look as WBC works with 45 women's organizations, and now we calculate up to 2 million people, to work to accelerate equal pay, position, and power for the advancement of all women in business, with a realization of gender parity and pay parity in the workplace. We are working faster together. That's our tagline. We appreciate each other every day, and we not only accelerate results, but we push to get the data and to share role models. And we need that from everyone in the staffing industry. So we say thank you. It's a very full month and it's a very full year. And we know and honor the importance of each staffing agency and the corporations and the private and public sector you serve. With that, it is my pride to turn this over to Barb Bruno and Kip Wright. Barb?
Thanks, Edie. I want to welcome all of you to this call, and I want to explain for a moment what the WBC Staffing Workstream is. WBC is an organization that has 9 initiatives, and I've seen this group accomplish more in a year than I've seen other organizations accomplish in 10 years. This is a group that they've taken all these organizations and put them under one umbrella, and Edie and the other leaders and Kip saw the need for having a separate group, a subcommittee within the WBC, specifically focused on staffing industry with a simple purpose. It's to drive awareness and progress around gender equity and parity within our industry. When you think of the individuals that we're placing in jobs, is it really reflected in the staffing and recruiting industry? And I want to thank Edie, basically for giving us this subcommittee. And we brought together some phenomenal leaders in the staffing industry from major companies. And we're working closely with these leaders from across the industry. And we're supported by key industry associations. And I have to tell you that it's wonderful getting on calls once a month with representatives, leadership from NAPS, TSA, SIA, and ASA. And it's interesting because they're promoting each other's efforts, they're sharing ideas. And when we asked, how often do you want to talk? How often do you want to meet? I was thinking bi-monthly, and they said, oh no, monthly. We see the need for this. We are 100% behind the efforts of WBC and this staffing work group. So we owe a lot to these 4 organizations who are really going out there and giving the message to their members. What we're trying to do is educate. We want to identify where we are as an industry today and create a vision here of who do we want to be in the future? Who do we really want the staffing and industry to represent? How do we elevate? How do we provide an awareness around a focus and parity within the staffing and recruiting industry? And that's through insights and observations. And Kip very shortly is going to show you a dashboard that is a phenomenal resource for all of you with information you're going to want to share with others. And then we want to activate. We want to provide in the industry within a roadmap on how to achieve parity. Like, we're not just going to come up with where we are and where we want to be. How do we get there? How do we actually take action and make things happen? And so we're going to identify and highlight solutions to these challenges and showcase best practices and case studies where this has been successful. So we want to bring attention to the firms that are doing a great job around this. Now we actually conducted a survey, a staffing survey, which is on the next slide. This comprehensive survey was around workforce mix and composition with an emphasis on gender diversity. And through our sponsor network, the service was sent to thousands of owners and top executives across the staffing industry. We received about 489 total responses to the survey, and everything we're doing is very database. Like, we're trying for the first time to really get our arms around and our minds around the data that represents the staffing and recruiting industry. And we've had a lot of progress to date. We've enlisted 35 senior women and men leaders from the staffing and recruiting industry who have joined the advisory council or the leaders group. And personally, I would like to invite anybody that's listening to us today. If you are a thought leader, if you would like to see change, if you would like to get involved on our advisory council or leaders group, please reach out, because we would love to include you in one of our groups. We'd love to include you in one of the initiatives, and we'd love to hear your ideas and your insight into what actions we can take. These individuals are financially supporting WBC as well as providing their expertise to address key issues. We released a press release of the findings, and that was published last week and picked up by most major publications. We had the dashboard introduced by Kip Wright. Kip has put a tremendous amount of work into this dashboard, and he's going to outline that next. And we're going to have a series of upcoming webinars. And so watch your inbox for anything from WBC, because these webinars are going to be, they're going to contain information that's going to help us get from where we are to where we need to be. We're going to establish a baseline understanding of equality across the industry. And that was by the completed survey. And again, the dashboard. And the dashboard is now on the WBC website, so you can access this information. And we wanted to identify 4 key findings that will drive our efforts in the future. If I've learned anything about WBC, WBC is not a research group. They're not, even though everything is based on data, WBC looks at what's going on and where we are, where we want to be, almost a gap analysis, and then they take action. And so if any of you listening to this today are that type of person, or you would like to see action in these areas, we would love to have you join us. The dashboard is allowing users to explore and analyze the results visually, which is now, again, on the WBC website. So if any of you are interested, please reach out to us. And now I want to turn this over to Kip, who was the brains behind the dashboard. So Kip, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all of our participants for joining today. As Barb mentioned, we've made an awful lot of progress in a short period of time, and did that through some pretty difficult and trying times for all of us during the COVID crisis. But I'm really pleased with where we've come. We've been able to create this work stream around staffing and to elevate the conversation within the staffing industry. We've been able to go out there and, as Barb mentioned, aggregate a number of very dedicated individuals, executives who want to make a change and want to drive and support this action item. And we were able to circulate the survey that she mentioned. We took the results of that survey, and we felt that it might be more helpful to put this into a more dynamic way of publishing the results. And so what I'm about to show you right now is, in fact, the live version of the dashboard. The dashboard itself, built in Power BI, allows users to go and actually walk through the various elements of our survey and look at the specific results in a much more dynamic way. So you'll see that this is structured in a way that has navigation tabs on the top. You'll also see that some instructions here on the very first page to tell you a little bit about how to use this dashboard. I'm going to show you in a minute. Some of these graphs are dynamic, so as you click into them, they will actually change other graphs. You will see that the results that we have here are a blend of the results that we had from our own survey, as well as results that came from some other sources we used to correlate this, U.S. Census and Bureau of Labor Statistics. And as Barb mentioned, really happy that we had 489 separate responses. So with that, let me just very quickly cover participation. You'll see in this tab that we had a really good mix of participation in this, a fairly high percentage of C-suite executives who took this survey, as well as senior management. had a good mix of public and private, probably a fair representation of what you might see in the industry, a good national, global, regional coverage. So pleased with that, and organizations of various size. So really pleased with that. A lot of broad participation across numerous skill set industry groups within the industry, but you can certainly see that it was somewhat dominated by the STEM participants. On the macro perspective, this particular tab is going to give you the ability to look at various dimensions from BLS and the census around where men and women represent within various industries, and where within those industries the differences are in terms of participation over time, as well as pay gap. I'm going to speak to this one in a few minutes. On the size impact, you will see here some additional questions that we asked around the percentage of resources in your workforce that are women today and your outlook for it. We have filters that allow you to look based upon participation of the survey by size of employees, staff employees, by revenues associated with this. There are also different elements to look at it if you want to just drill into questions around the executive team or questions around the board of directors. We've also added a unique tab to look at what those answers look like if the organization is run by a woman versus run by a male. And so you'll see some interesting perspectives that come from that. And then lastly, you're going to see here under diversity and priorities, some more specific questions we asked around getting some sense on where organizations were focusing their priorities, what priorities did they have around driving and retaining women in the organization, creating a different mix, and again, giving you the filters to be able to look at that. So that is how the dashboard works. And again, you are welcome to look at that. I'll actually mention one more thing about this. As you look at these elements, you can actually drill into some of the elements here, and you will see that the other graphs change. So that's a dynamic nature of this, which should allow you for a little more effective analysis of the results. So let's talk a little bit about those results. What did we see when we looked at it? As Barb mentioned, we believe we see 4 key findings that we felt were compelling enough for us to put some additional effort behind. I'm going to walk you through those and just give you a glance of how the data supports that. The first is that there's a profound pay gap between women and men, both within the industry and across the US as a whole. I mentioned the dashboard itself has this macro perspective, which does look at industry size and participation. If you look down here, you will literally see the differences between men and women, hourly wages, again, according to BLS. And you can see that shows right now a roughly a $5.34 gap between men and women across all occupations. And that represents a roughly 24% difference. So certainly this graph illustrates that difference. If you begin to look at some of the specific groups within here, you can see here's one, business and finance. Again, if you drill into that, you'll notice that women disproportionately represent this group. I think they represent 55% of all jobs within business and finance. And yet the average pay is roughly $8 an hour, or 28% difference. And you look in the management side, what you'll see here is you'll see that in management, something interesting happens. You see that men suddenly shift and become the larger percentage of gender within that occupation. So you will see across all occupations 44% of women, but you'll see here that only 38% are making it into 30% of the entire workforce are women. So an interesting element, but again, when you look further down into the pay gap, you'll see that in management, there's a $9.80 gap, which actually represents a 31% difference. And then last but not least, as we talk about some of the key roles that you see within staffing, a lot of our roles are sales, account management driven. So sales and related is an interesting one to look at. You can see here that women represent roughly 49%, so roughly half. But you would think that there would be an awful lot of parity across that. And in fact, it's much wider, $7.62 an hour difference. And when you look at that against the $16.93 an hour for women, that represents a 45% pay difference. So clearly we've got some challenges in terms of ensuring that pay parity is there across all industries and within the staffing industry specifically. So that is finding number one. Again, as Barb mentioned, we'll be digging deeper. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But that's kind of where we felt we would put one stake down. The second is that the staffing industry as a whole has a fair balance of women and men across this workforce. Actually, you would see, and I'm going to show you in a minute, that women comprise a much larger percentage of the workforce in the staffing industry. But however, somehow there's an imbalance that occurs as you start to look at leadership levels. So we see that women become underrepresented in senior leadership roles. Where might the graph show that? Well, let's look on this one. So if we look at size impact, and we look at the percentage of women that are in the workforce, you will see if you weight each of these categories, you get a weighted average of roughly 67%. Okay, great. So women are certainly much more proportionately represented in the staffing industry, according to our survey respondents. All right, but when you get in and start looking at the executive team, you see that shift. You see that shift here where it shifts over towards the left. And if you weight those, it's in the low 40s. It's in the low 40s. What's interesting is if you look at this based upon organizations that are led by women, you see that begin to shift towards the right. If you look at organizations that are led by men CEOs, you see that shift towards the left. So certainly something that we can do as an industry in terms of doing a better job of promoting women into women into executive leadership roles, I think is clearly a finding we think is very compelling. Third, women CEOs bring a unique perspective in the industry. They're more likely to drive initiatives that create a stronger, more balanced culture, including priorities around diversity. We mentioned in there, we had this diversity and priorities tab. We asked some questions around that. So you can literally see as you look at the differences between where women rate certain priorities versus where men CEOs rate certain priorities. But I found this one somewhat interesting. Here, we asked the question around, does your organization have written goals around driving a different percentage of women in the workforce? And in fact, across the whole of the industry, that number is 17. When you look at women CEOs, respondents whose organizations are led by women CEO, that jumps to 20. When you look at respondents led by a male CEO, that drops to 14. That's a 30% difference in the two. So clearly you see that our respondents suggest that when a woman is running an organization, they're more likely to be aware of and to drive diversity efforts, including driving much more diversity in the workforce. And last, we had an observation that we believe there's a lack of racial diversity across this industry, with people of color comprising well under 10% of that staff. And this particular question was not one that we originally featured in the graphs, but one as we looked back at some of the data that we produced, and we began asking some questions and digging anecdotally and looking at other research, it was clear to us that this industry has not done enough to drive diversity from a people of color perspective. And so this will be one of the areas that we begin to dig a little deeper in to see if we can find best practices and examples of where organizations have embraced that and really driven it. Where we have seen, where some of our research shows people of color, it tends to be in more corporate level back office positions rather than frontline recruiting and sales. And again, maybe that's something as an industry that we can begin to embrace and address. When you keep in mind that people of color represent 45%, 44% of the US population, having something that low is a pretty stark challenge for us as industry leaders. So with that, Barb, you mind if I turn it back over to you?
Not at all. What we wanted to do is, again, WBC is an action-taking organization. So we took the work stream and we basically took all the key findings of the dashboard and came up with 4 separate operating teams who each have an area of focus. And what I love is one of the national leaders from each organization, SIA, TSA, ASA, and NAPS. We have one of those leaders in each one of these groups as well, on each one of these teams. Each team has a leader, and they're addressing, like, Team A is looking at pay equity, Team B is looking at women in leadership, Team C is looking at gender diversity, and Team D is looking at diversity in the staffing industry. Now, if any of those areas interest you, if you find yourself passionate about any of these topics, again, I would personally invite you to join our work stream, join the advisory council or leadership team of WBC, because these groups are now meeting and each team member on each of these teams has taken over an area that they're going to, bring additional resources. We want this all to be data-based, but then they're going to come up with action items. By September, we're going to have, the action items that are going to change us from where we are to where we need to be. And again, these 4 groups have amazing leaders as well as representation from all our national associations. In light of this, we're also promoting events that these associations are doing. We've got, TechServe Alliance has an event coming up. It's advancing women in IT and engineering. It's a candid discussion, and it's led by Leslie Vickery, who is also a member of our advisory council. And believe me, it'll be a very open conversation. That's on March 8th. And the information to sign up for these events are in the chat box right now. So if you go down there, you can see the links. Or if you want to call TechServe Alliance direct, I'm sure they would love to have you participate. This is a free event. Another upcoming event is being sponsored by ASA, and it's being sponsored by the ASA Women in Leadership. And the title is Negotiating for Self-Networking Call. And again, this is in celebration of International Women's Day and Women History Month. And their program is on Tuesday, March 16th at 3 p.m. And so please watch for these events. Again, the sign up for this event is in your chat box, but I'm sure if you, reach out to ASA directly, they would also give you the link to sign up. Both of these events are open for non-members as well as members. And again, it thrills me that all 4 of these associations are working together to promote what WBC is doing as well as what each other are doing. And so our leaders, our national associations are really getting behind this effort. And I would really welcome all of you to do the same. So I hope that you sign up for these events and the future events that we're going to announce. And I think I'm going to turn the floor over now to Gwen to sort of wrap up everything.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barb and Kip. And this is fantastic to hear these insights and see that dashboard. What I liked, and Kip, I'm going to throw a question to you as we open it up to the audience, just to get everyone motivated and started. You and I talked a bit early on when we were looking at the dashboard and some of the results about sort of the size of the company, medium size versus large versus small. What does that do in terms of whether women are present and the percentages?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So when you do begin to look at some of these differences, you find, so surprisingly, you find that some of the smaller companies may tend to have a better representation, skewed more, perhaps more towards women. You find that the larger organizations tend to be much more balanced. So I think that's good. They've definitely, and you would expect many of those organizations being public, they have, embraced and created a pretty good structure. But then you start looking in some of these other categories, and it kind of skews weird. Like it's really strange that some of these organizations have such variety in terms of how their workforce is composed. So it's definitely an element that's worth exploring. And, like I said, just using the dashboard and getting better insights into what it might tell us. And this will be part of the topic that we drive in each of these 4 teams to really understand. So we see on the surface some interesting findings. Let's get deeper and see what that might mean to us.
Yeah, and see how they interact. Like you said, the size could be more formal policies or written commitments or something, which may be the reason or may not. We are going to open it up to the audience for a question. I would love to see those coming up through the chats, if you will. And we'd love to ask those questions, and I'll see if anyone comes up. Edie, do you have any questions from your observations and questions for Kip and Barb?
Yes, I wonder why we don't see more commitment for the future to see the change in numbers. What does it take? I think as we see the Business Roundtable and other organizations standing up for getting more women and people of color, why don't we see the staffing agencies, as you asked the question, do you have plans? They have more plans to drive change.
Yeah, Barb, I'd love for you to chime in on this. I'll give you my thoughts. I think in the context of so many things that these staffing firms have been faced with, evolution of the industry, changes they've gone through, it hasn't been a priority. I'm not suggesting that that's in any way wrong. I would say, as we put out this survey, we were putting out this survey literally in the midst of the COVID crisis. So this was a kind of a second half of last year. And, you know, last year, 2020 brought about a lot of change across just the entirety of how we as a country think about equality, think about parity, and in so many different ways. I suggest that that will probably change dramatically the next time we do the survey, but that's my thinking.
Mhm. I agree with Kip, and also I think that, you know, in the past there hasn't been a lot of attention spent on this because our jobs for the most sake are base salary plus commission. And so the theory has been everybody's paid equal because you're paid on performance. So of course we pay equally. And, you know, when it comes to the diverse candidates, I think that the staffing and recruiting industry is going to realize that many of our clients need to address the roles that they have to hire more diverse candidates. They have to pay equal. It's interesting because the salary band laws have really helped equal pay more than anything else, because we can't ask candidates in 19 states, you know, what they're currently earning. And my experience in my own firm has been that we're getting much higher offers because they can't ask what somebody's currently earning. So the salary band laws have helped, you know, pay percentages come up for women as well as men. But I agree with Kip that I think we're going to see changes in the future. It's something that just was never on the top of the radar of staffing and recruiting firms, because we place so many people in jobs. And I do think that clients are going to start, you know, wanting to know, are we diverse? You know, we obviously have a lot of women in our profession, but I think there's going to be some more scrutiny, especially these large governmental contracts, you know, that a lot of these staffing firms get. You know, they're going to want to know that we've got diversity within our own organizations. So, you know, hopefully the next time around that we do a dashboard and do surveys, we're going to see some changes. I think it's going to be baby steps. I don't think this is going to change overnight. But, you know, we place a tremendous amount of diverse candidates. We place a tremendous amount of women. You know, our own internal organizations have to start reflecting who we're representing.
So in addition to the awareness raising, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Thank you, Sue, Burnett, and Robin. In addition to these sort of what I call the awareness, or what you call sort of the shifting world since COVID, one of the questions is, how can we convince large staffing companies to have more women in the top management and also have them paid equally?
I'll start.
What more can we do in terms of policies or beyond sort of awareness raising? Sorry, Barb,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I'll start out with, you just have to have women in the pipeline. If you don't have women that you're moving up, if there's no career path, because often in these staffing firms, you know, our recruiters can make extremely good money. And a lot of women that are working as recruiters or account executives or that, they're making extremely good money. And, you know, you know, I think it's up to the women too, to let it be known that they would like to get into leadership. You know, because often they're very comfortable. They're making great money as a salesperson or as an account exec. And so part of this is on the women themselves to let leadership know that they would like to be considered for management roles. But when you've got someone who is a top producer, they normally don't want to be in management. So we have to pipeline because they can make more money, you know, working a desk, you know, doing the job every day. So I think we have to identify women that are not necessarily only money motivated. They do want to rate, you know, they do want to, you know, get higher up. And once they do get higher up and they've got these leadership roles or executive roles and they're sitting at a table as a VP, they should be paid equally. And again, it's going to take, the majority of our industry is female right now. And I think it's just going to take a matter of educating everybody. The dashboard, the work that went into that dashboard is phenomenal. And that's the first time our profession has had a tool that they can go to. And kudos to Kip. You know, I mean, this was all, you know, his brainstorming and going around there, and he actually developed the dashboard. That's the first time I think our industry is really seeing data that is giving us something to work on. You can't argue with numbers. You know, it can be perception, but now we have numbers, now we have statistics. All these groups are going to get more statistics and more resources. And I think once people are more aware, you're going to see change.
And we talked about, you have a work stream around the pay equity, and pay equity, that seems like a really great place to start. And now that this awareness raising and the information's there, Kip or Barb, thoughts on that in terms of that particular division of the work?
Yeah, I think, you know, Barb kind of mentioned it. There are certainly laws out there that are creating an easier environment, or perhaps a more balanced environment where that pay can be addressed. But when we created this work stream, and Barb, I appreciate the kudos, but there's 34 other people, including yourself, that within this work stream that have made this possible. And so, to be clear, that's the effort of a lot of people. And frankly, the only way this gets solved is by the support and effort of a lot of other people to make that happen. I think part of when we designed the work stream itself, we thought about this concept of educate, elevate, and activate. And we were very intentional with that, because the way to make change is going to be through creating the awareness, right? Identifying how that creates challenges for us as an organization, or the flip side, which is what we should really be accentuating, which is the positive elements of having a more diverse workforce, right? What does that bring in terms of growth, of profitability, of candidate attraction, all the things that are important to us as a recruiting company. When you are a more balanced company, when you're much more diverse, when you're embracing these things, you become much more attractive to a broader pool of talent. And that's exactly what we're in the business of doing, is finding the best talent in the marketplace. And so I think there's a lot to just the awareness and making a commitment to drive some of these changes.
I want to think, Gwen, that the event that ASA is doing is targeting a very important topic, because what their program is about on March 16th is, why don't women negotiate for themselves? Why are women so hesitant? And so on that webinar, they're going to share 5 key strategies and actionable insight to help women better advocate for themselves going forward. So sometimes the reason women are not promoted is because they're not advocating for themselves. Then they're going to do breakout rooms where women can talk to other women in the industry and chat about strategies that have worked for other women. So, again, women have to be able to also promote themselves and not be hesitant when it comes to going after those roles and going after the salaries they know they're worth.
That brings in piece of that sort of awareness and education piece that the workstream is working on. We have a question from Donald Fan at Walmart. Barb, can you explain a little bit more how you differentiate the 4 focus groups and sort of the core effort of each of those groups? I think a little bit more detail, because I think this is super interesting, and where the kind of, as Kip said, taking the data and running with it right now.
The reason that, and there's a little bit of crossover in the 4 groups, but what we did is we took the results of the dashboard, and so pay equity obviously is group A, and they're strictly looking at the differences in pay from at every level in the staffing industry. The women in leadership, group B or team B, is just looking at that there's a lot of women in our profession, but then when it gets to upper leadership roles, they're just not there. So that group is really focused on that, like, how do you get the women in leadership? The gender diversity, I can tell you that whenever I'm speaking in front of audiences of staffing and recruiting firms, I mean, it's very aware that there's a lot of women in the audience, but what is the gender diversity? And then we get to team D, which is overall diversity in the staffing industry. There just is not a lot of diversity. And it was interesting, because when we looked at the dashboard, those of us that have been in this industry for years, we probably could have predicted the results of the survey. I mean, some of the areas were surprising, but most of it are things that we know, but they've never been addressed. And now we've got the vehicle, through WBC, through all the national associations to really address these and come up with actions to just solve these areas. And again, Kip and I are the co-chairs, but these groups are being led by very strong people. We've got 4 team leaders, and we don't even know what these groups are going to come back with. Like, we gave them the information on the dashboard. We said, this is the area we want you to look at, we want you to look at. Like, when we say pay equity, we have no idea what they're going to come back with, because Kip and I are not participating in their meetings. We're not participating in their research. We basically said, and the people that sign up for these groups are very interested in a specific topic. That's why they're working in this team. They picked what topic they wanted. And then they're going to come back to Kip and I, and they're doing a lot more research. We want it all to be data-based, and they're going to do all this research. And then they're going to come back to us with, okay, this is what we found out. This is the data we have. These are actions we believe we can take to solve these problems. And so this is all about, yes, this is what we found, and this is the actions that we're recommending. And so Kip and I don't even know what the 4 groups are going to come back to us with, because obviously we've empowered them. What WBC does is, no matter where your level of interest is, WBC empowers every advisory board member, leadership council member to go out there and figure out where is your passion and where can you make a difference, and what actions do you want to take on behalf of the initiatives of WBC. Because the work stream is not a separate group, it's a subcommittee of WBC, and the driving force here is to empower every single person involved, men and women. And by the way, if there's gentlemen on these lines, we need some powerful men, some thought leaders that are also men that would join WBC, like Kip. And Kip's organization is a role model for what the staffing and recruiting industry will look like in the future. When you look at his diversity in his company, all the women leaders he has, Genuit really is sort of a role model, the poster child for what I believe the staffing and recruiting firms are going to look like in the future. So it's great that Kip is that involved, and I would welcome any other people that are listening. If any of these topics interest you, get involved. We would love to hear your thoughts and get your input so that you're part of the action that we take.
Yeah, and to close that out, a couple of things, Barbara, I think is incredibly important about your work groups as well, is as the WBC is working through our gender and parity in the workplace work group and the women in the pipeline work group, is we're linking all of these key core questions of where do you find people, the supply, where's the demand, going to Kip's point. Companies now and businesses are asking for more diverse sets of candidates, are asking more about inclusive work environment. We have a DE&I group, and really threading not just the research and the evidence, but the actions that we all want to do. So I think that's incredibly important. And in order, on that note, and to close this out, because this has been a great discussion, this is not a one-off discussion, as Kip and Barb and Edie have mentioned. These are work streams with work coming back. We are an action-oriented together. The WBC hashtag is WBC Faster Together. So this webinar is the start of a series of webinars that we will be having with the associations, with various CEOs, to really talk about the solutions, the action steps, and what we can really do to take this data, to take the knowledge that we have, whether that's the pay equity knowledge, whether that's company commitments, whether that's the size of the company or the association, to really say, okay, what is going to move the needle, and how are we really going to take the next 3 steps? And I don't want to lose Kip's thought as well about the sort of fact that the future of work and the playing field has shifted slightly with COVID and telework and technology kind of all intersecting one of those moments where companies are asking these questions, organizations in the staffing industry as well. I encourage everybody as well to go to the website at WBC. Erin has put that in your chat, to interact with that dashboard. And the design of that, the ability to have those filters and click on one and see how the data changes is incredibly fascinating. And to keep an eye out for the future of our webinar series, when we as the WBC Staffing Council are reporting back on the work of these 4 work streams, and reminding all of you that it is Women's History Month. So not just the associations, but all of us on this call have events coming up where we're talking about gender diversity. We have an event Tuesday with Million Women Mentors on the challenges in the technology industry. And then I encourage all of you to end on a fun note that at 3:30 Eastern Time Tuesday, WBC is joining Women in the Vine for the world's largest toast for gender equality. So it's great that it's virtual. I'm a firm believer that whatever point of the day, there's a need for champagne, from a mimosa to a cocktail. So thank you all for coming today. We look forward to engaging with you all in the future. And I want to thank Kip and Barb and the entire staffing workstream for all of this work that was done with the survey, and all of you that participated in the survey. And as well, Edie Frazier and the WBC, we are truly faster together, and we will see you all again Monday on March 8th, Women's History Day. Have a great weekend and a great Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.